everybody and welcome back to another video by Funlearn Tutorials. In today's video, we'll again be starting with converting a dynamic form game into a static form game, and then we'll understand what is the non-credible threat in the particular game. So let us start with the game. Suppose there is player 1 and player 1 has two strategies. So this is similar to the game that we had considered before. The player 1 has one strategy which is capital A and the other strategy is capital B. Once player 1 decides on the strategy whether he or she wants to take capital A or capital B, then player 2 gets to decide. Now here is the difference between a dynamic game and a static game. In the previous exercise that we had considered, I will be linking it in the description box below as well as in the top right corner of the video. I had left it here and then I had said that player 2 again has two strategies, small a and small b, and based on what player 1 and player 2 decides, the final payoff of the game is decided. That would be for a dynamic game. Now if I want to consider it to be a static game, what would it essentially mean? Essentially what it means is, suppose I want to draw the normal form game. What is the normal form game? The normal form game is actually the static form of the game that uses the matrix formation. So if I want to draw the static form game, I'll have to draw a matrix. Here again there is a difference. Essentially what happens is, when we consider the static form game, we have to consider the matrix form, right, as I have mentioned before. So when we consider the two possibilities that player 1 may choose capital A and player 1 may choose capital B, there actually arises four possibilities for the strategy of player 2. So let me just put player 2 on the column heads and player 1 on the row heads. So player 2 can have small a as one possibility. The meanings have been discussed before. I'll just go in brief over them. So I'll just choose one strategy. Suppose I choose the strategy BB. It essentially means player 1, if player 1 chooses capital A, player 2 will choose B, small b, and if player 2 chooses capital B, player 1 chooses capital B, then player 2 will also choose small b. That is the meaning of the strategy set. Now let me just write down the payoff for the game tree format, 3, 2. Let this be 1, 1. Let me just remove the bracket. That will make things easier to understand. So let me just put 1, 1 over here. Then suppose the payoff is 7, 4 over here, and suppose this payoff is 2, 5. Now this is the situation that we have at hand. Let me just change the color of the pen as well. So this is the strategy that we have, right? This is the strategy. Now we can again place these outcomes in the matrix form as well. So if player 1 plays A, player 2 plays A as well, then the outcome is 3, 2. So let me just put 3, 2 over here. Similarly 3, 2 will also be here. You can find a symmetry actually. And then if player 1 plays A and player 2 plays B, then it's actually this outcome. So you can put 1, 1 over here and 1, 1 over here. Then if player 1 chooses B and player 2 chooses A, it's going to be 7, 4. And similarly this will also be 7, 4. Actually this one jumps, and then of course the other remaining part is 2, 5, and then we have 2, 5. Now if we want to go by backward induction in this game, we have to first, when we consider the previous game, we had said that the dynamic form game is converted into a static representation of the game, right? We were converting this game into this game. If we want to consider the reverse form, so we want to convert, we know that it is a static form game and we want to make it look like it's a dynamic form game. So that is the difference between the exercise that we did previously and the exercise that we are doing right now. When we do this, essentially what happens is, in dynamic form game, the player 2 can see what player 1 is doing, right? The player 2 essentially knows where the player 2 is. So the player 2 knows that either a capital A has been played, okay, so I am here, or the player 2 knows that capital B has been played and okay, so I am here. But in case of static game, what happens is these two players play the two strategies simultaneously. If not simultaneously, at least player 2 does not know what player 1 has chosen. It may be that player 1 has taken a decision one day and player 2 took his or her decision 1 week later. But player 2 at least does not know what player 1 has chosen. That is the difference between a static game and a dynamic game. How do we incorporate that possibility here? We draw a dotted line over here. What does that signify? It signifies that player 2 does not know whether he or she is in this position or in this position. That is essentially the essence of a static form game. Now, if we consider the conversion of the normal form static form game, essentially when we consider static form and dynamic form, we consider that this is the normal form game and this is the game tree format of the game. So when we convert it from a normal form game to a game tree format, this dotted line has to be introduced to signify that this is actually a static form game and not a dynamic form game. Now when we try to solve it by backward induction, we find that for the player 2, 2 is greater than 1. So player 2 will choose this possibility. So this outcome boils down to 3, 2. And when we look at this node, that would have been for backward induction, right? For the time being, we are considering it to be a dynamic game, and we are seeing what would have happened if it had been a dynamic form game. And then player 2 would have compared 4 with 5 and would have decided 5 is greater than 4 and would have said, okay, this part would boil down to 2, 5. That would have been if it were a dynamic form game, and then we could have used backward induction, right? So the player 1 would know that, and player 2 would say, okay, 3 is greater than 2, so I am going to choose capital A, and that would have been the result. So the result would have been this, and then the result would have been this. This would have been the backward induction outcome.